Welcome, Rosebuds! Today we're introducing a new series here on Black Rose Reads. Every Saturday we'll release an episodical short story that will span a few weeks at a time. Keeping with the theme of our channel, you'll have to listen all the way to the last episode to find out if there's any truth in the tale or if it's completely made up. Because I am a writer myself, and it is my passion, these are stories that are written exclusively by me, hence the title of the series, Black Rose Originals. Today's tale will be taking place in my home state of Connecticut, where there are no shortages of spooky legends and lore. This story will span 3 episodes over the next 3 weeks. So settle in, grab a cup of hot tea, and enjoy The Haunting of BEVIN House. The Haunting of BEVIN House by Black Rose Reads. My name is Saley McBride. When I was young, I was fortunate enough to grow up with excellent school teachers who inspired me to want to become a teacher. My biggest inspiration was my mother, who taught at the elementary school where I would attend all 6 formative years of my education. Little did I know that I would become a teacher, but not like the childhood role models in my life. Instead, I would become a very unconventional teacher, but an inspiration and guide nonetheless. The epicenter of my journey, which would mold me into the person I have become, all started with my childhood home in BEVIN, Connecticut, which was unarguably haunted. Even after all these years, I still live in BEVIN, but not that home anymore. The house itself stirs up very mixed feelings within me. BEVIN is one of those small, quintessential Americana towns with just under 15,000 people. Everyone knows everyone, and the local gossip runs rife at every town hall meeting. Still, when there's a crisis, everyone in the community pulls together and is there for one another. Despite all the creepy paranormal experiences that my mother, sisters, and I would experience, I had an extremely happy childhood. My parents inherited an old colonial house from my grandparents. Oddly, my grandparents never had any paranormal experiences when they lived there. At least that's what they claim. The house was a typical 3-story structure, with a wide porch, large columns supporting the upper balcony, an attic, 4 upper bedrooms, the lower floor living areas, and a creepy old basement. Perhaps my paternal grandparents weren't spirit sensitive, but admittedly, my father never quite experienced the kind of unexplained occurrences the same way my mother and I did. I suspect that if he ever did, he likely brushed it off with a rational explanation, which was probably indicative of his police officer's no-nonsense demeanor. However, later, we would invite a well-known spiritualist into our home, and she would inform us that my father's failing health was likely due to the paranormal activity occurring there. I was the oldest of 3 girls in our family. Our childhood days were spent at Little League games and community festivals, planting gardens in the summer, raking leaves and harvesting pumpkins in the fall. Clam bakes on the beach and many other fun-filled, memorable activities spanned our childhood days. My parents were 3rd-generation locals, and it should go without saying, they were very active in the community. Our home was across the street from a living historical legend, Miss BEVIN herself. Her ancestors had founded the town when they had built the first and largest American bell factory in the nation. Of course, the bell factory was closed. Still, Mrs. BEVIN's son ran the local museum, carefully illustrating their family and the town's history. Without knowing or choosing, my destiny was to become a local legend, earning me the affectionate moniker, the Ghost Lady. The 4 females of my family experienced more paranormal happenings than I can probably document here. And as I stated before, I'm sure my father experienced things and chose not to give his attention to them. Perhaps he felt that it would simply go away if he ignored it. However, my mother and I shared the bulk of spiritual sensitivity of the 5 of us. Naturally, therefore, we also had the most frequent and intense experiences. I can vividly remember my first experience, because we lived in an old colonial home, The decor matched the historical nostalgia of the architecture. For example, a room upstairs was designated the nursery in the traditional Victorian-style nursery setup and decor. My mother would have been pregnant with my sister Ava at the time of the first event that I experienced. I distinctly recall how difficult it was to snuggle up next to her with her swollen baby bump under her nightgown after she rescued me from the nursery that night. I had woken up out of a deep sleep feeling scared for reasons that didn't make sense in my child's mind. Then suddenly, I just sat up, and at the far end of the room, there was an oddly dressed woman I didn't recognize staring at me. Because it wasn't my mother and it was the middle of the night, I was confused and frightened. At first, I couldn't find my voice, and then I opened my mouth and a scream erupted out of my tiny lungs. My mother came running in and knelt beside my bed. When she entered the room, she walked right past where the woman dressed in strange clothes was standing. I was unsure if my mother saw her, as her primary focus was to calm her young daughter. I don't remember much after that other than the woman disappeared. I imagine it was very uncomfortable being pregnant. Still, my mother picked me up and took me to her room to sleep with her, nestled close for the remainder of the night. I remember being inconsolable. Looking back now with my adult mind, I realized she was probably getting very little sleep due to being late in her pregnancy. I also remember my father grumbling some half annoyed, half asleep, chiding words to my mother about not letting it become a habit. To which her soft voice replied, "Only tonight, John. I'm tired and I just want to sleep." Then I heard him snoring. In my child's mind, I remember feeling that my father's snoring was comforting, as it would keep the lady with the strange clothes away. There are too many occurrences to document them all here. It would just simply take too long. But towards the end, there were occurrences at least once a week before we sold the house. The next marked paranormal experience that left an indelible imprint on my young mind would be a few years later, when I was 5 years old. My sister Ada now slept in the nursery with me. She was in a crib and I was in a twin bed. Again, I woke up from a deep sleep. This time, not because of an apparition, but because my bed was shaking as if there was an earthquake. Of course, being 5 and living on the East Coast, I was unfamiliar with earthquakes. In my young mind, I thought Ada had escaped from her crib and was shaking it underneath my bed. But as I began to shake off the haziness of sleep, I realized Ada was fast asleep in her crib. This moment would be a turning point for me. Even though I was only 5, I believe this moment defined my paranormal experiences to be remarkably different from everyone else in the household. I sat up as the bed continued to shake. I stretched out my short little pointer finger and chastised the entity causing mischief by firmly saying, "You stop that right now! Bad! Stop it!" We had recently acquired a Labrador Retriever puppy, which my father had been training. I had witnessed our dog Rex making mischief, chewing up and shaking a throw pillow in his mouth, back and forth, and my father using the exact words and tone to discipline Rex. Of course, Rex cowered, dropped the pillow immediately, and tried to skulk off. I don't believe I consciously thought about what I was doing as my bed shook. I was simply mimicking my father's behavior. However, I remember being quite startled when the bed suddenly ceased moving and remained immobile for the rest of the night. This event gave me confidence in a subconscious way to understand that these entities didn't entirely have power over me. I never forgot that experience, but I would not process what it meant until much later in my life. There were many other little occurrences. Many people are unfamiliar with old New England properties. Many are on quarter to half-acre sized plots, with accompanying barns that get converted to garages or workshops. Our home was no exception. I remember being outside in the old barn looking for something irrelevant. I startled when this old radio on a shelf began making noise as if someone was turning the dial looking for a radio station. The sounds from the local stations would fade, then grow as the radio's volume was also being turned up and down. Even though I was initially surprised, I went to the shelf and picked it up. Then, realizing there were no batteries in it, I rolled my eyes and slammed the radio down. The radio stopped transmitting after that, and I returned to what I was doing. At the time, I was about 12, and these incidents were becoming a regular part of my life. On a warm September evening, my sisters and I were home alone, gearing up to snuggle on the couch, share a big bowl of popcorn, and watch a marathon of movies. It was the middle of September, school had just started, and Halloween was in about 6 weeks. I loved the autumn season in New England. Rationally, you'd think that living in my paranormal house, my daily dose of spookiness would be sufficient. However, I did love watching scary movies. Notably, other movies about hauntings and ghost stories. I was about 16 in the late 90s, before the advent of streaming television. We did, however, have an impressive collection of VHS tapes. With the autumn season and Halloween right around the corner, I wanted to watch scary movies. Our parents didn't like us watching scary movies as they were both out of the house at the town meeting, but being the oldest, I felt entitled to make the final decision. My sisters, Ada and Lily, were having none of that. It was already dark out, and an East Coast storm was rolling in. We call them nor'easters, and if you've ever been privy to one, they can be quite the spine-tingling event, even without being inside a haunted house. I felt like it was the perfect backdrop to watch spooky old movies, but Lily was pitching a fit. Looking back on that night, I had been unaware of how traumatizing many of Lily's paranormal experiences had been up to that point. In my self-centered 16-year-old mind, I perceived that my sisters looked at the unexplained ghostly encounters with the same impassive emotional stance. I would not learn until much later that this was not the case. Lily and I began to argue vehemently, while Ada, always the quiet mediator, tried to calm us down and find a compromise. Suddenly, amidst our screaming, a loud thud could be heard upstairs. Then footsteps running down the stairs leading to the second floor, causing all three of us to fall silent. This incident might have been the first inclination toward how different my sisters felt about our haunted house. Because I was already in a heated state of anger, I turned my attention to the ghosts on the stairs and shouted, "Ah! Shut up already!" Lily, only 11 years old at the time, suddenly had an expression on her face I couldn't read. Her eyes filled up with tears, and she seemed both enraged and embarrassed. Then she stormed off to the kitchen, and Ada followed her. But not without Ada leaving some parting words. "You could try not to be such a bitch, Saley." I felt stung and confused by Ada's response. She was always calm, never prone to anger. I also felt indignant that Ada was siding with Lily. I couldn't see past my stubborn teenage pride to understand why. Nearly a full year would pass before I would finally analyze the memory of that night burned into my mind. I sat alone on the couch watching my scary movies while my sisters locked themselves in Ada's bedroom. I'm unsure what they did that night because they didn't come out again once they locked themselves in. It took me getting through half of my movie before my ire towards both of them dissipated. My parents would always return late on those nights of town hall meetings. It was their ritual to go out to dinner at their favorite restaurant and make a date of it. They had left knowing the three of us had a movie night planned, and I didn't want them to come home and see me alone on the couch. So I trudged up the stairs and went to bed only after watching one movie. I had been looking forward to staying up late, and feeling forced to bed early only fired up my anger again. That's it for this week's episode, my spooky rosebuds. I hope you're enjoying this tale thus far. Any guesses about whether there might be a kernel of truth in this story? I guess you'll have to tune in next Saturday to find out what happens in Chapter 2. For now, that's a wrap. Take care and stay creepy.